They've spent more than £1.5 grand and are now back at square one. Their debts still outstanding.
It's not easy because you don't want to be seen as vulnerable, or you don't want to be seen as daft, or you don't want to be seen as, oh, not another, somebody else that needs help. You don't want to feel like that.
And that's what the media want them to look like. That's what the media are trying to make these people look like. They want to make these people to be made out to be individual failures rather than victims of a badly designed system at the whim of incredibly unscrupulous companies who profit off of this stuff, and a government that enables them, and a media that enables the government to do that. If you're somebody who watches this stream pretty often, you'll know that one of my big things is private sector debt. And I think that the growth of the economy that we've basically had since probably since 2008 is built entirely off the back of regular members of the public taking out huge amounts of private debt. And this is a big problem. Debt is being utilised as a way of making up for the fact that people don't have enough money, people don't get paid enough because wages have been stagnant, as we discussed yesterday. So the debt crisis is something that needs solving, which is why I advocate for a public debt restructuring company to try and get members of the public out of high interest debt from credit card companies and things like that. So we'll see what the charities have to say about that. Should be some interesting content at the very least.
It's the knock on the door that more people than ever are now dreading.
Literally every day there was somebody ringing us, or we had an email, or we had a letter. It was literally every other day. And then it got too much, to be honest.
With a cost of living crisis, debt is booming. Business too for the firms cashing in on the finances of the most vulnerable. Channel 4 News and the Bureau of Investigative Journalism have been looking at a looming debt crisis and those who are profiting.
Isn't capitalism fun, children? Isn't it great that huge amounts of money is to be made off of the fact that people are essentially destitute, and deliberately made by making them even poorer than they are currently? Isn't our world just fantastic? I love it.
The fear of spiralling debt has dogged Michael and Catherine Mason for years. She has complications following brain surgery and he's her full-time carer. Unable to work and with a family to look after, their finances spun out of control.
It was desperation.
Confusion, guilt, shame, all the emotions you can think of, because we didn't want to get in that situation.
In 2021, they got a call from a company offering to help them with a repayment plan called an Individual Voluntary Arrangement, an IVA, costing £80 a month. But after they signed up, they struggled to keep up with payments and were driven into even more debt.
How many times have you felt like you've had to cut back on how much you've eaten?
About 8 to 9 times. We didn't do shopping 1 week at all, did we?
No. We had to live off whatever we had in the freezer or in the cupboards.
Luckily we got help from friends to give us a food parcel. We don't want that for our kids.
They turned to a local law.
But Julia Hartley-Brewer and her friends at Talk TV will tell you, and Lee Anderson will tell you that, if you have to use food banks, you're just not budgeting correctly. Or if you can make meals for 30p, and then you just look at this stuff and unfortunately you can't make food with no money, right? Doesn't matter how cheap you make the food. As long as it costs more than nothing, like when you're in debt, there's nothing that you can do. There's nothing that you can do.
Centre for help, and it was only then that they realised they were part of a growing trend of those sold IVAs they couldn't afford.
Did you feel that things had been explained clearly to you? Do
No.
you feel
No.
like you went into that situation with your eyes open?
No.
No, because there was lots of things in there. I mean, the paper at the centre was nearly 50 pages long. But we told them I had dyslexia. I told them I couldn't understand jargon.
In principle, an individual voluntary arrangement isn't bad. It's an alternative to bankruptcy for those who want to keep expensive assets like a house or car, who can afford to make monthly repayments for around 5 to 6 years, with an IVA company taking up to £4,000 in fees. There are other avenues, though, like a debt relief order.
And that's the problem. Again, this doesn't solve the issue, right? It may make it easier to repay, but it doesn't. It still compounds the fact that you're still having to pay more money for having no money, right? At the end of the like, so much of our economy is based off of this as well. Like, you've all heard the story of you know, a poor man will buy a cheap pair of boots, you know, and it will last you 6 months. You have to keep replacing them, whereas a rich man will buy an expensive pair of boots and they'll last forever, which makes it even more expensive to be poor than it is to be rich. In the same way that there are a bunch of things that rich people just don't have to pay for, as well as, you know, look at the difference in price up until very recently between prepayment meters and people who pay by direct debit for their energy bills. Thereby, poor people had to pay more money for just the simple fact of being poor. And on top of that, you have to pay more money to be able to have money in the first place because you're poor. Over the decades, I've seen this sort of interview too many times. Capitalism needs to die in the putrid, rancid ditch it lives in. And the thing is, this is unique, right? This is unique to kind of the societal death spiral that we've gone under neoliberalism, right? Like, they don't get this kind of stuff in Denmark and Finland. When you have, you know, a reasonable sized welfare state, when you have properly funded public services, when you have people who have wages that are good enough to live on, and we don't have spiraling differences between worker remuneration and executive remuneration within enterprises, for example, this kind of stuff just doesn't fucking happen. And the worst, I complain a lot about, you know, low wages having to be subsidized by the government, for example, in the form of in-work benefits or housing benefit, or the childcare program that they just released in the budget, for example. It's all there basically to supplement the fact that people don't get paid good enough wages by the companies that they work for. And this is just even worse because they don't get paid enough. They don't get enough help from the government. Off the back of that, there being these vultures of the capitalist framework are coming saying, you know how poor you are? Well, what if you were even poorer, but you still survived and I took a bunch of money from you to do so? Yeah, I saw that some more news episode. Yeah, Roland, it was really, really good. It's really, really good. It applies, you know, across the board really amongst kind of the neoliberal countries at the moment. But it's just incredible, and that's why a public debt restructuring agency would be such a good idea, right? Because then at least, right, if you're paying some sort of incredibly small interest on your debt consolidation you've had from the, you know, the state credit union or whatever it is, at least then that money is then going back into funding public services that then you'll still have access to. Whereas at the moment, all this is doing is making a small amount of incredibly rich shareholders even richer of these kind of vulture loan companies. And then I think an IVA isn't even at that bad at £4,000 in fees over 6 years. You look at how much interest new credit card companies take, how much payday loan take. Right? Remember when Wonga.com got into huge amounts of shit because they were charging 1,000% interest on their loans? You know what the next step is after asking nicely doesn't work? Well, exactly. I mean, if this continues, we will, like, unfortunately, we're just not like the French enough to be able to not put up with this shit. It's genuinely inhuman. The companies that do this stuff, genuinely inhuman. Like, how you can go home and sleep at night knowing that this is what you do to people. And then you've got to think that it's not just the fact that there are these new vulture companies that come in and swoop in to try and, you know, make money out of these people's destitution. It's the fact that their destitution in the first place that's caused them to go to these kind of these lenders is entirely born of political choices made by the government. It's literally the government could have stopped all of this. This never needed to happen. But they couldn't think about what they would do if they impacted the theoretical profits of these massive companies that are underpaying people's wages, right? Getting the chair of Tesco coming on Question Time going, oh, well, no, we need to be more grown up and civil in our politics. I'm like, no, you need to, you know, look in the faces of the people that you're underpaying and tell them that you're you're worth millions of times more than they are as a person in the society. Strong, how on earth do you sleep at night, Mr. Cameron energy? Well, it all goes back to fucking David Cameron. All of the problems, they all go back to David Cameron because, you know, this debt stuff, this has been going on for a decade, a literal decade. of this kind of stuff in a post-financial crisis, post-austerity world. And this is where all the small economic growth that we have done. I mean, I remember Jack Monroe was on Politics Live saying, yeah, what green shoots we have had have been off the backs of all of the dead people that have been killed by the Conservative government. I mean, Thatcher and Reagan, yeah, that's true. I mean, it all does end up going back to Thatcher and Reagan, which goes back to Friedman, which goes back to Rupke and all of the neoliberal economists and the Chicago School people. If you don't have enough money, have you tried hard enough? Just get 7 more jobs and don't sleep. It's easy. And that's what's really dangerous, is the kind of hustle culture side of things, going, well, if you're not working 60 hours a week at 3 jobs, whilst also making money selling stuff that you've bought on Alibaba on Amazon as a resale, then clearly everything is your fault. This hustle culture is kind of endemic towards the individualization of all societal problems that are the root of bad economic choices made by profligate governments who have no care for the people that they're supposed to represent. Which, to be fair, they don't represent poor people. The Conservative government doesn't represent these people. It entirely represents whoever fucking donates to them. And they do honestly believe it. 100% they do honestly believe it. And again, that's what Thatcher wanted, right? The method is economics, but the goal is to change the soul. And she has changed the soul of an entire nation to be selfish, grasping simpletons with a necessary part of their human soul being cut out, as Charlie Brooker would say. And they honestly believe they're doing the right thing. I'm not saying that you have to, LDOR, right? And 100%, anybody who's telling you that you need to take ownership of your life and take every single step that you can to make it best as they can be, these people are all correct. But what they are unwittingly doing is taking ire away from the systemic factors that have got you in that position in the first place. Everything cannot be societal, nor that everything be individualized. Everything has to be a mixture of both. I reckon Mr. Tesco would be able to look in a starving worker's face and say those things because rich people genuinely believe they are better people. I mean, yeah, there's definitely that case, right? You look at the World Economic Forum, Davos type people, the effective altruism style members of society, who genuinely believe that they just have they believe in the great man theory has got them into their position, and therefore it is up to them to solve the problems of the world. And that's why the World Economic Forum exists in the way that it does, because these people have a genuine sense of self-superiority. And they see that there are problems there. So they're trying to find ways in which they can use their superior brains to solve those problems, which coincidentally involve not impacting their own personal wealth in any way whatsoever.
An easier and cheaper option for those who rent and live on benefits or have less than £75 spare a month. It costs just £90 and wipes out debt after a year. But you might have spotted a crucial difference. In the IVA, insolvency companies have struck gold, pocketing thousands in fees and often paying third-party companies to reel in customers for them. To see how some of those...
And that's the worst part about it all. It's all fucking wheels within wheels. So much of our the capitalism that we live under, neoliberalism, is all just outsourced to different people so they can pass the buck along when this inhuman shit happens, right? Well, it's not the fault of me, it's the fault of the people who employed me, or the people who employed those subcontractors, or the conglomerate that owns the company that employed the subcontractor that sent the people to your home to repossess your car. And that all this gets the buck gets passed down over and over. We saw that with the British Gas forced instalment of prepayment meters. We saw that as well. And everybody taking their individual piece swiped off the top out of the huge amounts of money that they've extracted from the poorest members of society. It's sick. It's genuinely sick.
Cashing in on IVAs operate, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism poses a single mum with benefit-only income and less than £75 a month spare, someone who'd qualify for a much cheaper debt relief order. We asked a debt solicitor to listen.
You don't want to be in debt when your daughter grows up and all the rest of it, so I do want to help. A debt relief order and bankruptcy, we can get rid of those completely, straight away.
That would be one of the first things that we'd be looking at.
But he rules it out straight away.
Absolutely. I cannot understand why.
A highly privileged friend of mine told you the Oxford Cambridge boat race isn't at all elitist. I would have literally walked out of the conversation. You're right, Woke Potato. Yes, we are not fans of cops on this stream.
Done that.
Is there any way you could cut back on? Anywhere you've overestimated on something?
They're just massaging the figures to make it work.
DROs can be very strict. They only accept 100 applicants. So if you apply, you might get rejected and lose your £90.
That's just rubbish.
If I were to take food out of your daughter's mouth, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if that was the case. Do you know what I mean?
I'm somebody who works in sales. I know these tactics, right? I know the shit that people say to try and socially engineer people into agreeing to this kind of stuff, right? This kind of linguistic programming they use, and the kind of pressure selling that they do, right? I know because we've been told not to do it, right? We've been told that we can't do this, and I wouldn't do it anyway. But I've seen the things that people will say to get people to sign up to share. You know what this reminds me of, actually? It reminds me of watching scam baiters. It reminds me of watching people like Kit Boga and Jim Browning, and listening to the kind of social engineering that these people will engage in to scare people into giving out the details that they need to be able to scam them. The kind of pressure that they're using there, where they pretend to be your friend, say, I'm just trying to help, right? I couldn't sleep at night if I did this to you. But whilst trying to get you to part with huge amounts of money and put you further into the debt spiral that you're already struggling with. How sickening. It's absolutely sickening, this stuff. And it's an incredibly lucrative market. Well done, capitalism. You put profit over people yet again. What a gigantic surprise. I'm so shocked.
But if you could do it, it's worthwhile checking if you could be eligible.
The other option is a government scheme called an IVA.
It has no greater government backing than bankruptcy and debt relief orders do.
So why do you think they're so keen to describe only the IVA as the government-backed option?
Because that's what they're trying to flog to people.
A new survey from Citizens Advice Bureau found 3/4 of those who are or have been in an IVA said they struggled to make repayments. Nearly 40% said it had had a negative impact on their debt levels. And 84% of debt advisors said they'd spoken to clients in either failed or unsuitable IVAs.
One of the biggest drivers behind bad advice are the referral fees that IVA companies pay third parties to reel in customers. Those are often worth hundreds of pounds. Now, the financial regulator's trying to bring an end to that practice, but that hasn't stopped a cottage industry of online debt advisors gathering pace and using ever more extreme tactics. The debt charity Step Change even found its branding, charity registration number and website had been stolen by an outfit calling itself Step Change Plans.
This is so disgusting. I shouldn't be surprised. I shouldn't be surprised. Welcome to capitalism. But this is just it's honestly, how can these people do this stuff and then feel like they are anything other than fucking subhuman scum? What? Absolutely unreal.
Almost identical bar the URL. A call operator linked to this fake website said he passed clients over to most IVA firms. We contacted the company he worked for but got no response. IVA regulation is a complex patchwork with no one body overseeing the industry as a whole and no powers to hold the companies at the top of the chain to account.
The problem regulators are trying to put an end to this immediately translates to the government couldn't care less about fixing this. 100%. 100%. As they said that, it's a confusing patchwork. Well, there's no one body to regulate this particular industry for the companies at the top. And the government could just set one up, right? They could just change that. They could change that basically at the click of a finger. So we're going to have this arrangement here with this particular government department who regulates this particular part of the financial sector. These particular companies, for example. I mean, I'm assuming most of it comes under the FCA, but even so, they could just do that. They have the power. They're the fucking government. They're the state. They can come down and clamp down on these people. But the only reason possibly why it's still as confusing patchwork, as this person puts it, is because the government just fucking doesn't want to. And actively wants to continue it going because the more financial transactions happen, the higher GDP numbers look.
The problem is this is likely to get worse as a cost of living crisis intensifies, and government need to get off the sidelines and give people the access to the regulated financial advice they so desperately need.
Would you agree with a definition of IVA as debt wonga?
I think I recognise some of the picture that you're describing, and one of the very disturbing things about what we've seen during the pandemic and the subsequent cost of living challenges is the way in which unscrupulous actors particularly pursue vulnerable customers.
Some of these firms are really respectable that are involved in this.
Michael and Catherine.
Turns out, right, there's no such thing as a respectable firm. There's nothing respectable about wanting to gain profit, right? There's nothing disrespectable necessarily about wanting to make some amount of profit, right? Under capitalism, when everyone also believes that profit is sacrosanct, right? But if you are a company whose main job is making money out of the fact that you've got more money and using poor people to do that, they were never respectable to begin with. They are amoral, right? We've got to remember that when we're looking at things like capitalism, when we're looking at things like neoliberalism, we're looking at the structure of society as it exists currently. None of these institutions are immoral. They are amoral. They do not operate on any kind of moral axis whatsoever. They operate on one single axis, and that is profit. Doesn't matter how moral or immoral that is. I mean, obviously, I personally, as a communist, would believe that all profit is immoral. I don't believe in profit. But even if you do believe that, the profits can be moral or immoral, that doesn't matter to the company. It doesn't matter to any of these institutions. It doesn't matter to any of these businesses. Because they've got to be able to generate the value for the shareholders at the end of the day. That is their fiduciary responsibility. They have no choice but to engage in this stuff because that's literally how the system works. Unless you change the system, nothing's going to happen because there is no moral considerations taken into any of this as far as the businesses operating this are concerned. They have to dehumanize their victims. The British media do it all the time, and we are taught to think that like they won. I mean, do you remember that? I think we watched on stream actually. There was the interview with Allegra Stratton trying to tell a benefit claimant that it was her own fault and that she's all to blame for this, just manufacturing consent of the viewer base to fundamentally view people who are on welfare payments, who are in debt, as being lesser than them. Like, the media obviously happily parrot these narratives the whole time. I disagree profit should be shared amongst workers of a company. Well, then it's not profit. Yeah, there won't be profit in a capitalist framework, 100%. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I agree with that viewpoint entirely. Addicted to much. Yeah. If it's profit sharing, then under traditional capitalist lens, then it's not profit at all because it's being paid out in wages and so, or being used to reinvest as per what has been collectively agreed upon amongst the workers in the enterprise.
Are now terminating their IVA with the help of Derbyshire Law Centre. They've spent more than £1.5 grand and are now back at square one. Their debts still outstanding.
It's not easy because you don't want to be seen as vulnerable, or you don't want to be seen as daft, or you don't want to be seen as, somebody else that needs help. You don't want to feel like that.
And that's what the media want them to look like. That's what the media are trying to make these people look like. They want to make these people to be made out to be individual failures rather than victims of a badly designed system at the whim of incredibly unscrupulous companies who profit off of this stuff, and a government that enables them, and a media that enables the government to do that.
It's embarrassing, I think, as well.
Yeah.
To say that you've got that low or got to that point.
But these companies just prey on the vulnerable.
Figures out last week show more IVAs was sold last year than ever before, nearly 90,000. It's an industry worth billions, but just how much of it's made off the backs of those with nothing to spare.
That report from Amelia Jen. Well, earlier I spoke to the Labour MP Angela Eagle, who's on the Treasury Select Committee, and I began by asking her why the current regulation of IVAs doesn't seem to be working.
I think it's not working because it seems to not be in one place. So the Financial Conduct Authority has some role to play, so does the Insolvency Service. Things seem to be falling between two stools, and then you've got the aggressive and downright misleading advertising that's happening on on social media platforms like Facebook and TikTok, all of which is selling false perspectives where some cowboy companies pretend that they're actually properly regulated financial advisors when they're just con artists. And so there's a whole range of areas that I think the government needs to get a grip on to protect consumers.
I mean, Angela Eagle generally does a pretty good job as an MP, although to think that they tried to make her the leader of the Labour Party instead of Jeremy Corbyn, I think is quite funny to me.
And there's a whole range of companies involved in this. And you talk about some cowboys, but one extraordinary loophole seems to be that the companies at the very top of the chain are often very reputable, very smartly branded companies, but seem to be immune from any sanction in this area.
Well, I think the thing is that we've got to stop the charging of fees. And once you stop the
We need to take these companies to fucking court. We need to take these executives and put them in fucking prison for the shit that they've done. I don't give a shit whether it's illegal or not. Make it illegal, retroactively so, and bang these people up. I am a prison abolitionist, but these people are sick, and they need the people at the top who are responsible for this stuff and who let this stuff slide and who enable this stuff. There needs to be some kind of recourse to these people, and because again, the company might get fined. The company might go insolvent or whatever. They might have to, pack up shop and then go and start doing something else with their time, right? But all of the executives at the top of the parent companies, all of the people who've made loads of money, as directors of these businesses that have made money off these poor people, they're going to fucking run away with huge amounts of money and then go set up another fucking, dog shit company doing some other kind of financial scam. It's just like all of the banks, where the banks got bailed out. Right? Banks may have collapsed, for example. Yeah, but you look at SVB. The actual executives, they made off with loads of money and bonuses before the bank had to get bailed out. And the same thing will happen with these, what she calls cowboy companies, with these predatory loans, for example. They'll have made loads of money off poor people. The company itself will probably get fined for doing what it has been doing after a load of hullabaloo about it. But all of the people who've made money off this, who took wages out of it as executives, for example, they got off fucking scot-free because it's all under an LLC or a PLC. So they let entirely off the hook on this. They'll be able to go and use that money to be able to set up some other company, which is going to be involved in probably very similar shady business practices. The great burden of the left. I'm a prison abolitionist, except for sociopaths like this for this exact thing. I mean, yeah, to be fair, maybe it's just gulags, really, innit? So I do feel like kind of a hypocrite, but the problem is that, as I said, like once you take down the company, another one will just spring up out of nowhere. There has to be some kind of deterrent for this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Charging of fees, the sort of financial model that a lot of the cowboy companies that missell these things use to make money will dissolve. So we need to have a system which is much more joined up. We need to have early warnings about the kind of things that are developing in mis-selling in these markets. And we need far faster, far more robust action to prevent the damage that's obviously been done by the mis-selling of these IVAs, which has left some people out of pocket and still not out of debt.
I mean, can it be left to the companies themselves, or is this something that will only be dealt with by regulation? Any role for government?
I think there is a role for government and regulators, and they should have been onto it faster. I think
there's two roles for government in this. The first of all is to take the people from these companies and actually show them some proper recourse for all of the shit that they've done and the people they've miserated. And second of all, there needs to be a public debt restructuring agency. It needs to be done. It's so important. It's paramount as far as I'm concerned. If you want to have a proper economy where people do actually thrive properly, is to take this private sector debt, use the power of the state to get these people out of debt immediately. Across the board, blanket. No more private debt for people who are on low incomes anymore. get rid of it from our economy completely, properly invest, properly get these people out of debt, have an economy where people get paid proper wages and there's not this gigantic gap between the rich and the poor, and properly get out of this spiral. Because unless you have the state coming in and forcibly extricating people from private debt, this will continue and will continue to compound and get even worse. There's no deterrent for white-collar crime. These mofos need to be hit hard and painfully. I mean, I have a sneaking suspicion that some of these debt restructuring company CEOs have been hoarding grain recently. I heard down the grapevine they may have been hoarding some grain. I think that there should be some recourse for that.
Anything is sold for a fee, and that fee is quite substantial. There's an incentive for people to be put on to IVAs when it's not right for them, and so.
Angela, are you saying there might be perverse incentives under an economy that's entirely built off the need to generate continual profit forever? Weird, that, isn't it? Who knew? I for one I'm very, very surprised by such a statement, and coming from a Labour MP too.
So as soon as there's a financial profit incentive, you get mis-selling. So that loophole needs to be closed. And I hope that companies that deal with insolvency will realise that being associated with these aggressive mis-selling Wild West exploitative companies is not good for their image.
I mean, in really simple terms, what could the government do right now?
The FCA has already announced that
send them to a gulag. No trial. No, obviously, there needs to be proper process, but a theoretical gulag.
It's going to ban fees. That should certainly be the case. There should be much more warnings about the kind of misleading and fraudulent advertising that's going on Facebook and other social media companies.
We've seen a huge rise in the number of these IVAs taken out over the last year or so. Do you worry that the cost of living simply means more and more vulnerable people will be targeted by companies offering to solve their debts?
I think it's clear that the financial pressures coming along the track with the increasing cost of living squeeze and the fact that...
and that's it, just like the financial crisis, just like austerity, just like the pandemic and the cost of living crisis is being used explicitly by companies to make a load of money out of people's misery. Explicitly being used to make money out of people's misery. We've taken the collapse of the economy, the collapse of people's living standards, the collapse of, in the 2008 financial crisis, people losing their homes. And there are some vultures at the back going, oh, time to profit from this next crisis. Isn't capitalism fun?
Trading conditions for those with businesses are going to get worse before they get better means that insolvencies are likely to go up. People need to be vigilant, and I'd like to see the regulators being much more proactive to make certain that those who are in difficulty know that an IVA is not necessarily the best thing that they can take out and use.
And any
Seriously can't deal with this shit anymore. Just acknowledge that capitalism incentivizes every form of profit possible. I'm so tired of all these liberals pretending that these criminals work against the system when they do exactly what the system tells them to do. Yeah, exactly. They're indoctrinated into the neoliberal culture, right? Neoliberalism is not just an economic system, it's an entire fucking worldview that's been and 2 generations of people have been entirely indoctrinated into. And, I'm very glad that millennials and to a lesser extent Zoomers have wholesale rejected the kind of cultural and individualized prescriptions that you get out of a neoliberal ideology. The neoliberal worldview has been completely rejected by these people. And hopefully that will see some political change. But unfortunately, even people in the 30 to 40 range, people in their 30s are all millennials. Yet they still don't get represented by any mainstream political party. Both the mainstream political parties are fighting for the over 40s and the retired. And anybody who's under 40 does not get a look in any political policy making at all whatsoever.
A direct message to some of the bigger companies who may use third parties to do the aggressive selling. What would your message to them be?
Well, my message to companies like that is don't outsource the selling of products that are going to be missold and then claim that somehow it's nothing to do with you. We see you. We know.
Yeah, just don't do it. Just don't do it. It's fine. Just don't do it. If we tell, thing is, Angela, you're absolutely right. If we just tell these profit-driven entities to not continually seek profit forever, and making it as easy as possible to do so through third-party subcontractors, they just won't do it. Yeah, if we just tell them nicely, they won't do it. Just please don't do it. Please be nice. Profit-driven company, please be nice. We hope that you do things nicely now. Pretty please, will you do that for us, Mr. Company? Pretty please. I mean, I hate her voice too, Kath. I mean, she's fine on a lot of stuff, but the idea that she was going to be like a future prime minister, it doesn't make any sense, does it? It really doesn't. But no, like the actual response to this is fucking send these people into the gulag in Minecraft.
Where you're getting your profits from. Straighten up your act and do the right thing for your customers rather than just your profit line.
Yeah, that's true. This is the delusional world that liberals live in. I'm utterly delusional, where they think that if they just tell people, they just say, oh no, get your act together, think about people rather than profit, as if companies will ever do that. No, they'll never do it. It's only ever about profit. It's the only thing that matters. And until you fucking realise that, you're going to continue pissing into the wind against a system that does not care whether you live or die, quite frankly.